we have this very controversial Elon Musk, but he's a throwback to the 19th century because he actually built a space company, real material things. He built a car company, kind of a David and Goliath figure against all odds. And now he's trying to take on all of Silicon Valley. And he's absolutely despised, even by civil libertarians, so to speak. And then they have actually deified this crazy, I keep mentioning him, bankman-fried, as if he's a Renaissance man when he created nothing. It was all a Ponzi scheme to channel money to all of these left-wing causes. But they despise a person who can actually build something, and they worship the person who can't.
For the wrong to rule, the good must just stand idly by. Hello and happy Sunday. This Sunday is a complete privilege for me because I get to be joined by one of my absolute heroes, Victor Davis Hanson, who is the Martin Neely Anderson Special Fellow at the Hoover Institution and the Wayne and Marcia Buskey Distinguished Fellow in History, and also host of the most wonderful podcast ever, the Victor Davis Hanson podcast. Victor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I was just reading your latest article for American Greatness, and you describe the new medievalism. And I just wondered if you could expand on that and tell me what you mean by that phrase.
Well, here in California, it's maybe the best frame of reference is that we're devolving into two classes. We have a coastal elite that's sort of like the medieval keep. In other words, they're never subject to the consequences of their own ideology. They feel that they pay penance in the sense that we saw with Sam Friedman, Bankman-Fried, that they mouth all of these global warming and diversity, equity, inclusions, platitudes, and then somehow that allows them to be, quite selfish. They can fly private, or if you're Mark Zuckerberg, you can have a 50,000 square foot home, or you can be Barack Obama and venture out every once in a while from your Kalorama mansion or your Martha's Vineyard mansion or your Hawaii mansion and lecture the country about its racism and inadequacies. And that's very medieval. We don't have a middle class in California. We're losing it. The last 12 years, middle class income stagnated. The same, I think, is true of Britain. Because of the regulatory and tax climate, but especially the globalization, it rewarded people with particular international transferable skills, media, technology, law, insurance, academia, entertainment, and it sort of punished the muscular classes that could be replaced or outsourced or offshored. So that, I think, is very similar, and the church is very similar. In other words, the main motivation in a lot of these elites' life is a secular religion. And I guess that we would call it mandated equality or equality of result. In other words, the woke movement believes that if any inequality is detected, it has to be associated with culpability. And then their duty is to find out who are the oppressors and the victimizers and how they owe reparations of some sort to the oppressed and the victimized.
Yeah, this new religion, as you say, the secular religion, which people call woke, I think it's sort of summarized in the LGBTQIA++, and that's intersection with BLM. Is there? Do you think there is a case for the fact that as we turn our back on traditional religion and traditional faith, that we kind of asked for this? We asked for this man-made religion and the consequences of what comes with it.
Yeah, I think even Nietzsche said something to that effect, that when you don't have any religion, you'll replace. People need some sense of transcendence. It's innate to the human species. And if you don't believe in the duality of a soul and a body, and have a soul, and that soul's future is incumbent upon its behavior while it was carnate on earth, then I think you'll substitute. And what they've substituted is this radical humanism, that this is all they have here in this brief moment. And to be transcendent or to mean something, they have to create a utopia on earth. And then the next step logically follows. But if we're going to do that, and we're so morally superior and cognitively superior, we need more power. And to get more power, we have to regulate, and we have to control, and we have to use the media, and we have to be given exemptions. So any means necessary for these superior ends are justified. You can really see that with this Twitter scandal we're going on here, and Mr. Bankman-Fried's career. All of these people have things in common, that because they're legionnaires in the woke army, they feel that they can do anything they want because of their superior morality.
I was on a train the other day. One of the people who I work for collects old steam trains, and it did strike me that the people that invented the iPhone and all of this stuff could never really put together a 1,000-mile train track. Are
No.
we losing skills? Are we?
Yes.
What does this new generation have to offer us as a global society, or as a national society?
Very little, because they have lost. You mentioned they've lost skills. Here in California, we have a high-speed rail that was supposed to start 15 years ago for 50 billion total. And now the cost is 300 billion. We haven't laid 1 foot of track. It's about 6 miles from my farm, and it looks like Stonehenge. It's just these huge monolith overpasses with no tracks, graffiti, and nobody knows how to do it. The same thing with things like aqueducts and freeways, reservoirs, airports. We can't build them, or if we do have a skill, we're stymied by utopian perfectionism. We have to be perfect, or we're not good, or we can't intrude on this group's particular interest versus that group's. So we're kind of paralyzed, and that's one problem. But the other problem is something more controversial, and that is, systematically over the last 20 years, but especially the last three, we've destroyed meritocracy. And all of us sort of said, well, woke will be okay in the English, they'll destroy my field, classics or English or history, because they feel they don't matter. But they would never do this to electrical engineering or computer science or medicine, and they are. And so we notice in our medical schools and our engineering departments, they're using equity grading, they're dismantling the GRE. So I think we're losing the expertise, the actual expertise to combat things. And we can see that in their heroes as well. Here in the United States, we have this very controversial Elon Musk, but he's a throwback to the 19th century because he actually built a space company, real material things. He built a car company, kind of a David and Goliath figure against all odds, and now he's trying to take on all of Silicon Valley, and he's absolutely despised, even by civil libertarians, so to speak. And then they have actually deified this crazy, I keep mentioning him, Bankman-Fried, as if he's a Renaissance man when he created nothing. It was all a Ponzi scheme to channel money to all of these left-wing causes. But they despise a person who can actually build something, and they worship the person who can't. And it's all because of ideology. And that's really sad, because I think the expertise is being lost, and there's no guarantee that each generation becomes materially better off than the prior one. It's never been true in history necessarily.
Today in England, they've announced the National Health Service has put up an advert for a lived experience coordinator on the salary of £115,000 a year, which is a big six-figure salary for people, in the same day as the nurses go on strike. Do you think this sort of creation of non-jobs, which is all I can really describe, and to me they seem like communist commissars being put there to apply political ideology to what is essentially a public service, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. They represent two dangers to a free society. One is, as you say, they're a drag on the economy because they don't produce anything. But the second is, they're not neutral. They go after people who do produce, because they're both envious and they're angry that other people are people of action and they're not. So they try to harass them. They're like, they're Lilliputians. And here in California, we have these diversity, equity, and inclusion czars, I should say, in the United States, and they're numerous. And what's very funny about them is the left, which is synonymous with faculties at universities, hate administrators. They always hated them. They said that they're expanding like rabbits. But suddenly, if you're a diversity, equity, inclusion czar, and you monitor the syllabi and the course content and the grading patterns of faculty in a way that no one would ever imagine, you're not a fascist, but you're considered, I guess, a fellow kindred traveler. And so that's really dangerous here in the United States. We're creating these huge administrative blocks of zero productivity, but they go after people. And that's one of the things that was fascinating about the Twitter manifestations. Musk went in there. The subtext of a lot of the hatred of him is he went in and saw that these people were doing nothing except monitoring what other people say. And when he fired them, they said the company would collapse, and it hasn't, of course. It's probably going to grow. And they've never worked in history. I mean, the Soviet Union let the commissars run wild in the late 30s and 40s, and suddenly, right around August of 41, when the Wehrmacht was outside Moscow, Stalin decided, I can't do this anymore. And so he turned over military operations to Konev and Zhukov and others, and sidelined the commissars for a while. And then the same thing, my favorite story, although I don't want to be an advocate of it, was when the Emperor Justinian was just about overwhelmed by bureaucrats. He put them all in the Hippodrome and unleashed Narcissus and Belisarius and wiped out 30,000 of them, the blues and the greens. And then what followed was Hagia Sophia, the Justinian law code, and progress. So I don't know. They're very dangerous. What's more dangerous about them is that we always thought administrators were sort of conservative, traditionalist, get in your business, nanny types, and so everybody was united on the left, especially in criticizing. But now they're on the left, and so the left doesn't criticize their own, and so they have a free reign, and they're very dangerous people because they can't 24/7, 360 degrees. They're looking out for some inequality, and they're determined to punish the perceived culprit.
And do you think that this is indicative of? It feels to me sort of very end of daisy in terms of the nature of our civilization, and we've always looked to America to go. America is an idea that is upheld by a system and a set of values, but even over here in the UK, every single national foundational institution is under attack, including, now we're moving into sciences, into biology. Are we looking at the end of modern civilization? Are we so leisured and affluent that this is where we've got to, that we're just going to criticize ourselves into the ground?
That's been a strain in the West, and it's when you look at classical literature, that stream of nihilists, Tacitus, Suetonius, Catullus, Petronius, that's what they said, that the combination of constitutional protected freedom and the personal life, you can do what you want, and then affluence that comes out of private property and market capitalism. And that was taken up by Spengler and Nietzsche and Hegel, those pessimists from Germany that said, it won't work. And we always said, no, they're just dark thinkers. Plato's a dark thinker. But I think our challenge has always been surfeit rather than scarcity and leisure, or what we call decadent luxus, I guess the Romans called it. Yeah, I'm very worried about it because obviously obesity is a bigger problem than poverty, and too much. We only have 62% of the workforce in the United States is actually engaged in real work, and the rest of them are in some kind of government support. Here in California, 50% of all the births are Medi-Cal or subsidized by the government. And so this leisure, we have an epidemic of young men in the United States who are not getting married, they're not having children, they're not buying homes, and they're staying in their parents' cocoon into their late 20s or even 30s, and they're dropping out. And I don't know whether that's because they're tired of hearing toxic masculinity, or nothing's required of them, or they can have sex with girlfriends without having any commit. Whatever the reason is, it's been dramatic. We had 2.2 fertility at the millennium, and we're down to 1.65 at European level. The irony when you say that about America is that we, I think many on the conservative side especially, always looked for Great Britain to be the sane player. We thought, well, you know what? We're a radical, we say we're a constitutional republic, but we have these spasms of radical Athenian like democracy. But the British are sober and judicious, and they always sort of kind of laugh at our extremes. But when you see what Britain's doing, we have the same feeling about you that you do about us.
Well, Britain is certainly, we don't seem to have a cultural douanier, a cultural whatever customs officer here. So we take on board these terrible ideas from America. But I think that I can forgive America for some of its ideas because of the fact that it's a newer country. But what I find very difficult to forgive is that certainly the foundational national institutions in the UK have been totally overtaken by a particular ideology. And I have absolutely no idea how we resist and fight back. I heard you the other day. There are two things you said to me, you said on a podcast, which were really fascinated me, was the fact that white Americans or from the flyover states were doubly represented in coming back in body bags from war zones. In America, have we lost a sense of, are we feeling so guilty just by the dint of the color of our skin and the way we're being made to feel terrible about everything that we can't resist? Because by resisting, we're also seen as racist, or we can't protect culture in any way because our culture is seen to be destroyed and disgusting by its very existence.
I think you're right when you say we. You're talking about basically people like yourself and myself that live within what I would call blue or woke enclaves, and we're in the professions, or we're angry about what's going on in the country. But the only thing that I have hope for, half of the United States is what I would call solidly red. And when you look at their fertility rates, it's about 2.5. And they have nuclear families, and their small towns are very safe. And so when I go outside of California's coastal elite, and I live in a community that's very rural, I see normality. And the problem they have is they're not engaged in the culture war or the war for the destiny of America. What they've done is they've sort of become outside dropouts. And by that, I mean, they don't watch this Super Bowl halftime show. They don't watch an NBA game. They don't watch the Oscars, the Emmys, the Tonys, the Grammys. They have no idea what they are. They don't go to a first run movie at a theater. They don't read the New York Times. They have no idea what network news. They haven't watched network news in 20 years. They don't listen to NPR. They have no idea what PBS is. And so that's going to be a minute. I'm on a farm and there's a tractor outside, but he's going to pass in a second.
And a mooing cow, I just heard.
Yeah. So anyway, the point is that we kind of forget them, and that was the people who came out of the shadows to vote for Donald Trump. And they're not the majority anymore, but they're at least half the country. And if they get energized and want to reconnect politically, they're a potent force. And more importantly, they represent a class solidarity. And we're starting to see here in California, just the very beginning. We shouldn't be too optimistic. I mean, overly optimistic, but I'm starting to see lifelong Mexican American liberals who are saying these people are nuts. And they want to destroy the Catholic Church. They want to destroy the idea of man and woman and nuclear families. They want to destroy the border. They want to destroy everything that we came here to enjoy and to profit from. So I think there's some hope, but the hope is not with our elite. The elite is gone over to the dark side, and it's going to have to come from the middle classes. But that's the only optimism I have. I work at Stanford University, and so what I watched there, I mean, I was just thinking the other day that These people preach morality to us nonstop. And as I'm speaking right now, the president of Stanford University is under investigation for dubious research. I don't know if he's culpable or not, but he is. And then this is where Mr. Bankman-Fried grew up. His parents, who somehow got a hold of millions of dollars in real estate from his Ponzi scheme, are some of the most vocal, loud law professor activists there were. We birthed our Elizabeth Holmes, the Theranos Ponzi scheme woman that broke $8 billion with that phony blood testing. And when you put that university next to $8 trillion in market capitalization, Google, Facebook, Apple, and then you put the Bay Area godfathers, political godfathers. By that I mean Dianne Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi, Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, Nancy. They all came out of there. That's a good representation of money and left-wing politics and this veneer or patina of erudition that Stanford offers. But they have one thing in common. It's pretty much morally bankrupt. And they've done so much damage, as we've seen with Twitter. And if you want to search on Google, you know that the search results will be calibrated by ideological concerns and prejudices. And here in California, we're short $25 billion this year in our annual budget. We have the highest taxes in the nation of any state, but we're giving guaranteed incomes to people on the basis of their sexual identity, transgenderism in San Francisco. And we're looking at reparations for African Americans, even though we were a free state during the Civil War, and we only have about 3 or 4, 5% maybe at tops of African American. So it's almost a suicidal impulse. It
It's
really
it's
is.
it's it feels like that. It feels like we're not on our side. We're not even on our own side anymore.
No.
And that's when I say we, I mean people that like to pass wisdom from generation to generation to generation. I think, which is the ultimately what if one wanted to define conservatism in a way, that would be one of the ways that you would do it. I'm very passionate about education, and I'm interested. I was listening to what you were saying about civic education for children. So, just for a brief sort of précis here, in England, we have this class that every child has to learn called Personal Social Health Economic. And what they do in this class is they teach them white privilege, gender ideology, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I would think I want to lobby and encourage the government and actually force a campaign to create a civic educational model for young people in schools to start learning. They give me a child till he's 7 and I'll show you the man idea. Could you tell me what, if I was to say to you now, Victor, please, could you put this curriculum together? What would be a few things in it?
Well, here in our country, and probably yours as well, you would have to have some idea how the government works. So we have no idea, or we, the young people, of the whole history of tripartite government, checks and balances, legislative, executive, judicial, and what the Supreme Court is, what the House is, what the Senate is, what the president is. So basically, 3/4 of the country has no idea. The second thing, so they'd have to know the structure and the form and the federal system and what is the prerogatives of the state under the Bill of Rights and what is left to the federal government. The second thing is they have to have some national shared identity so that in a multiracial society such as our own, there are things that overcome tribal concerns. So that would be things like, what was the 4th of July and why do we celebrate it? Or what is Thanksgiving? What is Christmas? What is, this is the anniversary of D-Day. What was D-Day? Do you know what the Battle of Gettysburg was? And so, do you know who Ulysses S. Grant was? So fundamental people and events essential to the formation of the United States and the preservation. People should know, and they don't. And then finally, they have to have some idea of what their civic duty is. And that means we used to have a national ritual where 75%, as recent as 2016, voted on election day, and nobody ever complained. They came, they showed their driver's license, they were checked to see if their name was on the voter registration rolls, and they voted. Then they went home, and then in a national shared civic event, they watched the election returns. Suddenly, the left, under the guise of COVID, destroyed election day, where now 75% of the ballots are not cast on election day. They're absentee, mail-in, or early voting, and the returns don't get back in most states for 5 days to 2 weeks. And it's rife with avenues for fraud. And so that was a destruction of an iconic event that brought people together. And that's very important in the United States because we're at a point now where 50 million Americans, that's the highest number, both absolutely and in a percentage of the population, was not born in the United States that resides now within our borders. And if we're not going to assimilate and integrate them, then we're going to become like, as I said earlier, the former Yugoslavia. So I think that's absolutely critical. In your case, I think the same thing would be true if I walked the streets of London and asked a young person, do you know who Lord Nelson was, or the Duke of Wellington? Or can you tell me who Queen Victoria was, or what's the difference between the House of Commons and the House of Lords? I don't think they could tell you. I could say that, just to finish, what's ironic about all of this is you're right when you say that these civic education programs, to the degree they even exist, have been hijacked by the left. They still can't answer the fundamental paradox. And that is, if this place is so toxic, the West in general, or Britain, why do so many people who are not Western die to get in here? And why, when they get in here, do they immediately feel they have grievances against their host in a way that they would never dare voice back home? And I think we know the answer, that it pays dividends to become an instant victim. But still, it's ironic because it does show you that these Western countries and societies are deemed preferable by almost everybody in the world, or they wouldn't want to be dying to get into the EU or Britain or the United States.
Mm. And not even staying in the EU, in most cases, coming straight over to the UK. We're getting record immigration this year. I'm hearing that between 8 and 14,000 people are crossing the border into from Mexico into Texas at the moment. This is completely unsustainable.
It is
surely
unsustainable. And in my hometown, it's 95% Mexican American. And I say that loosely with the understanding that half of those people are not Americans. They're here illegally and residents. And the ironic thing, again, is that when immigration is meritocratic and measured and diverse and legal, then we have no problem in the United States. We assimilate, integrate people from anywhere very quickly. But when it's illegal, massive, and it's not diverse, i.e. it's coming across the southern border, then we have these enclaves where I live. Right a quarter mile away, I think there's 45 people living in one farmhouse enclave with trailers and sheds put up, violations of every health standard, every building code. And yet, here in California, no building inspector, no zone enforcer, nothing, no zoning enforcer would ever say a word because they feel that would be discriminatory. They pick on the law-abiding citizen. They go after his misdemeanor to justify their neglect of the felony that others commit that aren't citizens.
So I think, for clarity, for those that aren't familiar, Victor lives in Fresno in California, which is a farming community, various things, raisins and almonds and things. And there was a very moving part of your podcast as you described driving through these areas where these houses once proudly kept, and that so many of the people had just left or in many cases committed suicide because they couldn't afford to farm anymore. And we've got the same problem now being forced into the European Union and into England, that there's a war on farming and production and food. And I just am interested to know why you think that is as well.
It's partly political. They feel that farming is traditional and therefore it's counter-revolutionary or conservative. And a lot of farmers are conservatives. And then the other idea is this global warming, hyper-religious aspect is they've gone back to farming and they've said, look what they did to Sri Lanka. They said that you're using chemical fertilizers and organophosphates, and if you let us use you as a lab rat, we will experiment. They almost starved the whole island into penury. And so that's part of it. And it's very, again, paradoxical. When I wrote books on farming in the 90s, it was very ironic for me because the left was celebrating the family farmer and organic food and sustainability. And the idea was, thank God for manures, they're natural. And thank God for not using. Now all of a sudden the cow is enemy number one, and the dairy is enemy. Used to love dairies because we would all go to the local dairies and buy their manure, and therefore we didn't have to use ammonium sulfate or calcium nitrate as fertilizers. But the left has just completely flipped on this, and now it's any type of agricultural activity that produces foods that enrich life, like ice cream or cream or milk or beef, that in their weird contorted calculus doesn't pencil out to being the best for the planet as far as greenhouse gas emissions or something, then they go after. And yet, again, you see these people. I mean, Joe Biden cannot have a photo op without having an ice cream cone. And all these people, you go to Whole Foods Organic, and there's everything there is coming from farming. And so ultimately, it's the fact that in the West, especially here in the United States, 98% of the people do not produce food. And farming has been so successful that just 2% of the population can feed the other 98, where in antiquity it was 9 had to farm for every 10 people. And until the Industrial Revolution, it was probably 7 out of 10. And then in the 1930s, it was maybe 3 fed 10, and now it's 1 feeds 100. And so people really have no idea what farming is. They don't know where their food comes. They have, just like fuel, they have no idea what fracking is or horizontal drilling or an almond tree. And so a lot of it's just this overweening arrogance from this new generation that's been taught in these universities that they don't know anything about food or fuel or construction or all the things they take for granted, and yet they're so judgmental and sanctimonious, but they're so ignorant and arrogant at the same time.
Is it ignorance and arrogance, or is it much deeper? Is it a spiritual thing? This idea that the biblical idea that man was given dominion over the animals, and that was the story that we were told. And now that the modern generation is taught that they are in their own way some virus on this planet, and the very way that they breathe is causing danger and damage to everything. Is there I'm just trying to I keep trying to frame my response to this crisis in non-spiritual ways, but to me I always end up with this same problem, which is you either have hope, love and faith and you believe, or you have the opposite of that, which is hell. So
Yeah.
I wonder whether it's arrogance or whether it's they've been taught to hate themselves and to hate their own existence on the planet.
Well, I think the arguments are similar. If you take the average student, say where I work at Stanford, he's been told that he's probably from an he's either from an elite background or he's from a marginalized community, but it doesn't matter. But he feels he's anointed in a secular fashion, and that he's destined to make a lot of money and to enjoy particular privileges, and therefore by a process of natural selection, he feels, and his own, I guess, hard work, or he thinks is hard work, then he has a right and a duty to tell other people what to do. And I think you're right that behind all that, nobody has ever taught him Christian piety or humility. And you can really see that in I guess I'd call it the cult of death, with this movement in America that we've had the last 40 years of radical abortion. I mean, we have 1 million abortions a year, but we have about 10,000, admittedly a small number, but it's a grotesque, it's almost out of the Aztec death rituals, where we actually allow partial birth abortions where the baby is sustainable and on the way to be born, and he can be killed or she can be killed. And we get to the point where if you say baby, it's a tip off that you're right wing. The word they use is fetus. No, even if the baby is on the way out of the birth canal. And even legislation in these blue states that say, okay, you want a late term abortion and you tried to abort the baby, but that procedure did not succeed, so the baby now is out of the birth canal. and you have to, by law, keep it. No, you don't. That's a big contention. If the baby made it, you still abort it, which is murder. And so there's
Well, it's
this
very
fashion, yeah, this fascination. And then you have people like AOC, Alexandra, or uh,
occasional
Cortez.
cortex.
Okay, yes, and she says that she doesn't want to have any children because she feels that the planet's going to be destroyed in 10 years. So there's something connected, not just with the actual numbers, with this radical abortion idea, but also with the idea that you don't replicate and you don't want to have children, and you don't want to bring souls into the world. Partly it's just selfishness that they don't. The Greeks said everybody should have children because they'll change your diapers if you change theirs when they're young, and when they'll change yours when you're old, so to speak. But they feel that if there's nothing beyond this world, then every single moment has to be given over to the appetites, and having two or three children wake you up or soil their diapers or need food is a distraction. And we have all these statistics that we're always told. If you have a child today, it will cost you $1.3 million over your lifetime. And that's very common for young people to think, wow, $2.5 million I could spend on myself rather than have children. So abortion and infertility or declining those are symptoms, I think, of atheism as well.
Are we responsible for that, though, in some way, by making life unaffordable, really, for a lot of people? A lot of people, certainly in England, your chances of being able to buy a house are very, very low until your late 30s, if you're lucky. So are we responsible for people turning around and saying, is the capitalist system reached a point where it's so difficult for people to be able to afford anything that the socialist model is now much more attractive?
Yeah, except here, I don't know how it works there, but here that's primarily a result of left-wing aristocratic wealthy people in this sense. So if you build or inherit a beautiful home in Palo Alto or Menlo Park or Woodside in Silicon Valley foothills, then and you have everything you need and you have an income, and then you want to make regulations to make sure that everybody follows the rules that you do, that your house has smoke detectors and it has a certain number of bathrooms or it's a certain square footage per lot, and nothing else will be allowable. And then you look out your deck and you see 50 miles of open spaces all the way to the Pacific, and you want that to be permanent. And yet, the person who cleans your house, mows your lawn, and cooks your food is commuting from Redwood City with 5 families living in one house or in the garage or in the backyard. And you're able to say to yourself, well, I surely do not want those people to have affordable housing that wouldn't be as elegant and perfect as me, and they would interrupt my view or they would populate this green space. So most of the regulatory obstruction that has increased the price of housing or made it unaffordable comes from the elite. And it's almost like I got mine and nobody else is going to interfere with mine. And if they really want a house, then they should do what I do. They should have inherited money, or they should have been one of the blessed, or they should have gone to Stanford. It's their fault. And so there's also this utopianism in the West that we have among our elite. We have to be absolutely perfect and do everything just perfect according to our creed, secular creed. Or if it's not, it's no good. If the United States, if somebody comes across the border today, one of the 14,000, and he doesn't have immediate parity with other Americans, and we have a Harvard study that shows that his caloric intake is not perfect, or he has a greater degree of need for kidney dialysis, whatever the thing is, then we're culpable. And the whole country is sinful for allowing that to happen, even though it's almost physically impossible, spiritually, mentally, anything impossible to take somebody from Oaxaca State in Mexico, the poorest region in the Western Hemisphere, and give them parity with a 55,000 per capita income American within, a year. And so we put these impossible demands on Western society, and then when we predictably fail, we condemn ourselves.
And how do we? So we've covered the societal problem, which you also cover in your amazing book, The Dying Citizen. But in terms of the woke thing, the elite problem, the new medievalism, as you call it, what is going to be the tipping point for your average American and for your average Brit to turn around and say, you know what, I'm done with being called a racist, or I'm done with having my voice silenced, and for my life not to matter as much as somebody else's? What do we do here?
I think we're almost there if we're not there already here in the United States, because I think people realize that if you allow this continuing, you're paralyzed. You cannot move, you can't talk, you can't function. And I have a daughter in Santa Cruz, very left-wing place, and she was apolitical, and she used to kid me about being conservative. Not that she was liberal, she was just apolitical. She and her husband, high school teacher, 3 children, one is severely disabled. And when she said to me the other day, I can't take the children to a park because if they're barefooted, there'll be syringes there. I can't go downtown because somebody homeless will expose themselves in front of the children. I come home and I'm worried that my 12-year-old daughter is being taught about transitioning over to another gender by the school district. We had to evacuate our home for 2 days because homeless people in a canyon across the street lit fires where they were living, and the smoke came right over to them. We had a fox come in from the countryside and have babies on our deck. And then the state came in and said these were protected species. You cannot go out on your deck and disturb them on their own property. And so for her, it became, and she called me the other day and said, Dad, we got to move. We've got to move. We've got to go to a rural area that's conservative or traditional because it's stifling. And her husband was very liberal at one time. And so what I'm getting at is I think people realize this is not sustainable, not globally or nationally, but in my own life. And if I don't speak out or do something or get angry, they're going to destroy us. And so I think a lot of people are saying, and how does that manifest itself? I think a lot of people are just saying, call me a racist. I could care less. It has no currency anymore. You've inflated it so much it doesn't matter. Call me homophobic, transphobic. I don't care. And it's funny how Elon Musk, who a lot of people thought was pretty leftist and kind of erratic, but they admired him for building this huge, successful Tesla and SpaceX and all that. So they did see him as a 19th century character, but his irreverence when they call him all these names and he just laughs about it, and they can call
It's
him
quite
almost
Trumpian,
anything.
isn't it?
Yes, it is. And that's what it becomes liberating. And Dave Chappelle is another person, or even Bill Maher, who's a hardcore leftist. So you're starting to see people that say, you know what, these people are cannibals and they're going to eat us too. And being left wing doesn't even protect us. They're Jacobins. They're going to guillotine everybody, including their former supporters. So I hope that people will stand up. Where I work, Scott Atlas is a good friend of mine, and the whole university turned on him when he worked for Trump as an advisor, when he just said the vaccinations, while valuable, will never protect us, and older people need to be protected, but children don't. The schools can't be shut down. He literally said we're going to kill thousands of people through spousal abuse, drug abuse, suicides, missed cancer screenings. He just laid it out. He was proved absolutely correct. And yet the university tried to fire him, and all the professors, not all, but a large number in the medical school wanted to yank his license. And he just said no. And I think he's still viable. He's still at the Hoover Institution where we work. So there are people who stand up. Jay Bhattacharya is a good colleague of ours. He's the same way. So there are these people that serves as a model that says they're going to try to destroy you, but they can't destroy you if you don't let them destroy you. If you just keep going on and on and on and on, and finally don't expect to get any thanks, but you can help defeat this mad. It's kind of like the Salem witch trials in my way, or the 1793, or the Maoist. It's a bout of collective madness, and it thrives on people's neglect or fear or inability to challenge them. But once you challenge them, they don't really have a viable agenda other than just, it's a nihilistic agenda. It really is. They don't. I mean,
Yeah,
they
and
want to.
it
Here in
doesn't stand up
California,
to scrutiny.
they don't want to build power generation, they want to shut them down. They do not want to produce food. They want to take acreage out of production. It's all nihilism. It's destroy, 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 and it's all been promulgated by very affluent people.
Who, as you say, will never suffer the consequences of their own ideology, which was so nice to see DeSantis fly some friends up to Martha's Vineyard. Just finally, do you think that, I know that Trump was polling quite well against DeSantis in in the potential primaries, but it seems like DeSantis is taking a bit of a hold of this now. Do you think that DeSantis has what it takes to be a global leader, or do you think Trump's still very much in the game?
It's very early. DeSantis had to prove to everybody that his competence and excellence in ruling and governing Florida did not mean that he was a technocrat, that he had Trumpian fire in the belly, that he would take on the left and be proactive, preemptory. And so he took on Disney Corporation over transgenderism and won. He sent the illegal aliens to show how hypocritical people were in Martha's Vineyard. He took on the school board. So while he doesn't have Trump's charisma and ability to capture a crowd, he does have the fire in the belly, but he's much more savvy about what the left does and how to avoid unenforced mistakes. Now, Trump, all he had to do, because everything, the news cycle was very beneficial to him. We'd had 2 years of Biden's disaster. Biden was polling about 39% to 40%. They were contrasting. Even leftists were saying, wow, on certain issues, Donald Trump did better than Biden did. In fact, he did better on all the issues. And then especially helpful to him was he had been written off as a conspiracy crank because he had warned people, they're out to get me at Twitter. They had no reason to ban me. They're conspirators. Proven true. Russian collusion is a complete hoax. Hunter laptop, believe me, it's authentic, he told people. And they laughed at him. So all of these things, I could go on forever. He was proven right. So he should be in the driver's seat. And today, in fact, as you referenced, he has a good poll. Yes, 2 days ago it was DeSantis was ahead, so we don't know. But this means it's almost inexplicable that rather than praise DeSantis with faint praise, as most frontrunners would do, he attacked him right before the midterms, no less. And he announced basically that he was going to run for president. He said, I'll have an announcement right after the midterms. And people said, don't do that. You'll just galvanize the left. And then people said, he tweeted, Glenn Youngkin name sounds Chinese, and Mitch McConnell's wife is this, and he made a racist comment about her. And then he said, we can replay the 2020 election if we tamper with this in law or even the Constitution. And then he brought this Nick Fuentes, who's kind of nobody really knew him except when his name appeared in print. He's a white supremacist, etc. So these were all almost suicidal acts. And what they did is, if DeSantis had to prove that he had fire in the belly, all Trump had to prove was that he was level-headed and he wouldn't make these gratuitous, insidious statements or errors. And he didn't do that. And so now people are saying, is it because he's 76 years old? Is it because he was treated so badly that he's obsessed with so we don't know. And we don't know anything because if we were having this conversation in 2016, everybody thought the DeSantis figure in that era was Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin. They said, my God, he ran that state for 2 terms. He took on the teachers union. He's in a purple state. He's got executive experience. He's a good speaker. And then he got on the debate stage and Trump just consumed him. He ate him alive. So we don't know what DeSantis will do. But right now, I think it's actually very healthy because we'll have both candidates. We'll have a long primary. And the only thing that we're afraid of is that if DeSantis were to win the nomination, Trump would bolt, maybe with the third party, like Teddy Roosevelt did and ruin the conservative chances in 1912 and gave Wilson the election. So we don't want something like that. But otherwise, you have to let the people decide. There's the fear of the moderates is that Trump will just continue these erratic patterns of behavior and nullify what's otherwise was a very good, they acknowledge was a very good agenda and successful governance. And the worry of the Trump base about DeSantis is that, knowingly or not, the never Trump moderates, rhinos, Mitt Romney wing of the party that is not really conservative will see him as entree to get back in good graces and swarm him with money. And then we'll be back to the McCain, Romney losing years. And where we're Mitch McConnell, no different than the Democrats. So we're going to have to play it out and see what happens.
I wonder if it's interesting, as you referred to Trump as a tragic hero, in the case for Trump, and you also referred earlier in this conversation to the fact that no one's going to get any thanks, right, for standing up. And I wonder whether his petulance and his fury and his upsetness is because no one ever said thank you for what he did, which was literally save America.
They never gave him any thanks, and they never extended any sadness or any condolences the way that he was treated. And he was framed and smeared and slandered. And I had written that, and I think he was very much like a John Ford hero, whether it was in The Searchers or maybe George Stevens Shane, where we were in a paralysis and somebody came in with certain skills that none of the political class had, like a gunslinger coming down from the hills. And we were the townspeople that were frozen and scared of the cattle baron. And yet his unorthodox means and methodologies destroyed them for a while and allowed us to have 4 good years. And then once we had that laxity of wow, this is working in 2020, we felt, well, we looked at his tweets as if the townspeople did the use of a 6-shooter. And that famous scene in the movie Shane when he's riding off, young boy Brandon DeWild said, "But Mom, everybody wants you. Everybody needs you." And she said, "Well, tell your mom there won't be any more guns in the valley. That's all over with. He killed the bad guys." And so I think that's Trump's kind of sad fate, that the tragic hero does what he's needed at the time, but the methods he uses are successful enough that they allow the beneficiaries, the moral sanctimonious, to say that I can't believe we ever invited him in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Victor Davis Hanson, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and for educating us and giving us your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
I'm a big admirer of the entire Fox family and your tradition of acting. I
want to go back to it. They cancelled me from acting. They cancelled me from acting for being mildly conservative.
No, I like your roles. And your father is James Fox?
James, yeah.
Yes. He was wonderful in A Bridge Too Far, I thought.
Oh, he's amazing. That was Edward, actually, but they're all.
That was Edward Fox. Is Edward Fox related to you as well?
Edward is my uncle, yeah.
Yeah. And James, he was very good in the first Jackal, too.
Yeah.
Your whole family has got a distinguished acting career. People in the United States know you all, so congratulations.
Well, thank you very much, and just thank you for bringing so much sanity and careful, and in your own words, sober and judicious sanity to this. But that doesn't make you boring, as you were worried about the other day when you were talking to Sammy.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me.
A pleasure. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.